Thinking an LLC will protect your assets? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Here in Texas, asset protection requires more than just forming an LLC. Let's break down what really works and what really doesn't. Hi, I'm John Strohmeyer with Strohmeyer Law, where we help our clients leave no unfinished business. While I am a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, so don't take the advice of some talking head on the internet. Remember to talk to your own advisor about your specific circumstances. Also, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Today, we're talking about asset protection again, and here in Texas, why setting up an LLC isn't always going to be the answer. So, we're looking to address potential fights and potential costs. These future fights can come up in, well, asset protection claims. How can we make sure that we're minimizing disputes and lawsuits, but we also want to avoid potential costs because poor planning can lead to financial losses. And really, what I see is that, LLCs, limited liability companies, are often promoted as a way of defeating creditors when ultimately it's not going to get people what they want. If you just have a single member LLC, it's not going to change anything for you. So, what is asset protection? Generally, it's not about hiding your assets. It's about managing risks before a creditor's claim does arrive. So, what it can do is help settle disputes early and avoid costlier litigation. So, what we're trying to do is for both business and your personal planning, minimizing those future claims. How does it work? Well, it depends on what the lawsuit is. What we're looking at is a way of minimizing how somebody can come and actually claim assets from you. And so we want to put this further into context. Remember, asset protection isn't one just amorphous blob. It comes in different flavors and at different times because somebody's going to ultimately sue you if this is going to be needed. So you're going to have to injure someone potentially, get sued. They're going to have to win a lawsuit and then try and collect. An LLC really is going to only help you at the end of the line. You're going to have injured someone, they're going to have sued you, and then they're collecting on a judgment they've won on. What does that mean? Well, the LLC is not there until the very end. And so keeping that in mind, well, what can we do? Well, the obvious candidates for people who need this sort of protection, obviously business owners, doctors, lawyers, real estate investors. Less obvious, well, rental property owners as their liability from the tenants, potentially parents of teenage drivers. Why are we doing this? Again, we want to minimize the lawsuit. The thing to remember is an LLC can only provide so much privacy. Why? Well, not everybody can look through and see your assets anyway. The assets they would be looking for, well, they're not going to be able to look into a bank or financial custodian and see who your assets are, whether they're in your name or in an LLC name. Likewise, if you have other business dealings, they wouldn't necessarily know that if there are other owners or somebody else is listed. So really, this could help with real estate and minimizing your name there. Again, don't forget that you're going to have costs with compliance, filing tax returns both with the state and with the IRS. So thinking about our asset protection, where does this come in? We also want to think about insurance and exemption. This is the most effective and ultimately most respected by the court. Insurance is going to be your first line of defense, providing cash for professional liability, home, auto, and umbrella policies. Your Texas exemptions, on the other hand, such as your homestead exemption, which is basically unlimited in value, as well as retirement accounts such as 401ks, IRAs, and even inherited IRAs. These work because they're simple, they're court respected, and they're effective. Because, well, it's free. You go set it up and it's going to be respected. Level 2 is where we're setting up collateralization, legal structures to prioritize certain creditors. You're going to be using debt and certain legal arrangements to protect your assets from seizure. So leasing your office furniture instead of owning it makes it harder for creditors to take it. Why it works? Well, it creates structured priorities that prevent direct creditor claims. Finally, level 3, LLCs and other legal entities, but only if they're used correctly. So LLCs can protect against business liability, but not necessarily against personal liability. Some common misconceptions we think about LLCs, well, I have an LLC, so I'm fully protected. This isn't true. Personal assets can still be at risk Beyond that, assets inside the LLC can be at risk because if the value of the claim eclipses the value inside the LLC, the creditor can just seize the LLC interest and then squeeze that LLC and take the assets inside. Remember, once you get to collections, you're going to have to disclose the ownership of your assets. You can't just neglect to provide information about that. Next misconception, well, you can just transfer everything to the LLC and be safe. Again, if done incorrectly, courts can pierce the corporate veil and hold you personally liable for what's happening inside of it. Finally, LLCs protect against all lawsuits. Well, again, LLCs are only going to protect against potential business liability, but not personal liability like car accidents, personal debts, or fraud. And beyond that, that LLC really only helps once you've been sued and lost. So, where are people getting the misunderstandings? Well, they assume that having an LLC is going to automatically shield assets. But if they're not properly maintained, it's not going to provide any protection. So pulling it all together, there are costs and limitations. Remember, there's piercing the corporate veil. If you don't treat your LLC as a separate entity, meaning you're commingling assets and business funds, well, the courts can disregard it. Beyond that, you need to keep proper records for it. Again, the courts can disregard it. LLCs aren't going to protect your personal assets. If you get sued personally, those LLC assets may be protected, but your personal assets are still going to be vulnerable. Beyond that, you're going to have your ongoing compliance costs. So filing and administrative fees, CPA costs, and then potentially even attorney costs. Finally, fraudulent transfer rules are still going to apply. If you move your assets into an LLC after a lawsuit has been filed or within that look back period, guess what? The transactions can still be unwound. So, pulling this all together, LLCs are not a magical shield. They protect against business risks, but not necessarily against personal risks. Once you've got it, you still have to maintain it properly. If you don't follow corporate formalities, well, courts can ignore your LLC. Remember, insurance and tax exemptions can still and should still be your first step. Don't jump past them just because they're not as fun and as sexy as saying, I've got a new LLC. Those things are simple and they're court tested. So these legal structures can help, but they have to be properly set up. An LLC alone is not going to be your answer. And in terms of timing, the best time to plan is now before you have a creditor issue. Once that creditor pops up, you can't really do much because all of your assets are on the table. So Texas offers strong protections to its debtors, but an LLC isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. If you think setting up an LLC is going to protect you, well, you may be in for a surprise. You're going to want to make sure your asset protection plan actually works and isn't some false sense of security. So remember, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.